Okay.
I had a question about that cover.
Yeah.
There. Is that all you need to cover for?
That's all that needs to be covered is this control panel. And the reason is there's a gasket in here. And over time, the sun and rain is going to make that gasket deteriorate.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the covering on this button, if it's in direct sun after a couple years, it's not, I don't think it's UV protected plastics, but it starts to break down, and that'll make it start to condensate, or rain could get in through that failure in the seal.
Mm-hmm.
Any moisture inside this control panel, it's over. Yeah, so that's a cover this sold by Grundfos. It does the job perfectly, of course. It's not a cheap cover. A lot of people will make their own application. Every other part of the pump can be exposed and get wet. We just need to cover this from rain and sun. So you'll find people using a lot of creative solutions.
Freezer lock back. Come on, right now.
And that's okay. And
There you go.
yeah, that kind of stuff works.
No cooling problems whatsoever.
Right.
That's how we do it.
Yeah, and that walks us into the next thing. So, ambient temperature. Of course, when we get down to freezing, really 32 degrees, this pump, if it's outside, it's got to be shut down, and we got to pull this drain plug and get the water out of it. Make sure the outlets are closed, or the inlet supply valve is closed or completely disconnected. If it's got water in it and it freezes, the water will expand. It'll bust the pump. It'll happen every year. So there's a lot of applications where people do put them outside. It's going to be rare to see one just sitting in the bushes. Most people have. It's an expensive unit, you know.
But in South Carolina, though?
You never know. You never know. So it's good to remind them. And that freeze problem is not protected under warranty. That's really protecting the control panel and not letting it freeze are the only things that are really not covered under warranty. Everything else, Grundfos is really good about their warranty coverage. 113 degrees. So it's, you know, we don't get that hot around here, but people will put them in an enclosure in the wintertime to insulate them, and that can work great, but then they forget to take the enclosure off in the summer, and it gets super hot in there and it'll kill it. So things to remember, things to ask questions about. Always remind them to make a calendar event or some kind of note about that winterization, though, because people forget. The pump's quiet, and if it's hooked up right, it's seamless. So you think about it when you bought it, and you think about it when you install it, and then you wowed when it works, but then after that, you forget. And after 6 months, you moved on. So if they don't have something to remind them to go check on it and make sure it's winterproof. So good thing to remind them about. People don't, a lot of people don't understand this stuff. So if you just expect them to get it and then the pump freezes and breaks, they're going to blame it on you or blame it on Grundfos. They're not going to blame themselves. So any way you can give them some clues to keep them out of trouble down the road, it's good. Any questions about that stuff? Water temps, the fluid temp. 95 degrees max on the fluid, the water that's coming in it, and 35. So there'll be a few manufacturing applications out there that might be worth asking if you're working with some kind of chilled water or water that's gotten hot because it's running through the equipment or whatever.
Real quick for the new guys, you see what kind of tubing they have hooked up to the pump. That's one nice little nuance you can get your customers is the flexible hoses. So that way it's not, the vibration from the pump isn't causing their entire plumbing to vibrate with it.
Yep.
Sean Woodard over here taught me about that one.
Okay. we brought up that there's 4 models, but actually there's 6 models. There's 4 models available in the U.S., 2 horsepowers and 2 voltages. In other countries, they use 50 hertz. We use 60 hertz. So we can get the 50 hertz models, but they're special orders. They come from Europe, and there's a long lead time. Extreme case could take 2 months to get it over here. But this call does happen. I mentioned the boat thing. A lot of these boats are made in other countries, and the boat ends up docked here. And there's boat manufacturers that use this pump when they build the boat from the factory. So years and years later, the pump's failed, and they're in the U.S. and they're trying to get a replacement. You might get that call. The other one is people that are manufacturing a piece of equipment that they're going to ship into another country. So if somebody's talking about that, and they're making plans to build that machine, and they can wait, we can get it. And if it's something they wanted to enter into an agreement that, hey, we're going to make a lot of these machines, we can start to stock that pump if we needed to. It is an option.
Josh, I'm under the impression, and I might be wrong, that a 60 hertz pump will work on a 50 hertz system, maybe not quite as efficiently, but you can't go the other way. A 50 hertz pump won't operate on a 60 hertz.
I know the 50 won't work on a 60. I'm really not sure. I can't say.
Okay.
I've had people that needed that 50, and they've done a lot of research, and they weren't willing to try the 60. That's all I got to go on, really. If it was me, I wouldn't play around with it. I get the right one.
Especially if they spec it and then ship it, and it doesn't work correctly.
Yeah.
And it's in Africa.
Yeah. Right. All right. All right, so the video maker obviously had a lot of fun with that. The pump should be bolted down. It doesn't really vibrate at all, so it's not about it walking. It's more about when it was installed, all the pipe work was put into it perfectly. And some of these installed in really tight places, and somebody could be in there to work and they bump the pump. Just shift it half an inch. Can put stress on the pipe work, and over time it could cause a leak in one of the fittings or whatnot. That is the number one reason that you would want them to bolt it down. It don't take any really serious bolts or screws. Any application, just keep it stationary is what they need.
Is there any advantage to putting something between the concrete, like dampening vibration?
Well, that's a good question. On the concrete, not necessarily, but I guess it's depending on how the place is built. But I have seen a lot of people put them on shelves on the wall, and the brackets on the shelf are connected to studs that go upstairs or just tied to the adjacent wall or whatever. And it does need a foam pad or something to help with that. It doesn't vibrate much, but it's enough to, it could transfer through the studs. So hey, that's a good question.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people ask if you could just put on a base, like a wooden base, like a 2x2 or a 3x3, just to fasten it down. But it's not the vibrations why, it's just placement
Yeah,
for piping. Okay.
that's right.
Cool.
I guess another thing to mention is, they're great pumps, rarely have a problem, anything like a leak or whatever, but there's a lot of stuff hooked to them. Something can always go wrong. It's good to remind them if they can install it somewhere that just if the disaster ever happened, it's not going to flood your place or damage your property. It's a major consideration if you're trying to figure out where you can put the pump. Especially in a retrofit situation, people might be tempted to put it in a cabinet in the kitchen or something, but if something went wrong, it's going to damage things. So, good thing to point out to them. All right. These two fittings, they need to be hand tightened and never put a wrench on them. They have O-rings in them, so there's no need for Teflon tape or anything, but they can put a wrench on, they'll break. And we sell a fitting kit. It's not cheap. And these are not fit. There's no good retrofit, if they break this guy, to try to replace it with something at the hardware store. It's virtually impossible. So we really need to take care of these fittings. Only hand tight on the fittings that go on, that connect to the pump itself. Now when they're connecting pipe or fittings to this fitting, they can use a wrench to hold this stationary and then tighten the fitting that's going to it. Still need to be cautious about not putting too much monkey on it. You'll break one or the other. So because this one is going to have some Teflon tape on it, probably need that wrench to help you get it down just a few more turns, but really need to take caution about not getting it too tight. It just needs to be just enough because it's plastic and it will break.
Is it okay to put Teflon tape on the inner side with the gasket, the O-ring?
This guy,
Yeah.
it's not going to hurt anything, but there's no reason to do it. Actually, with one thing you could risk with this fitting, this one's made to have a little flex to it, so if the pipe just can't come perfect, you got a little bit of movability. If you put the Teflon on it, you run the risk that it comes up a little too high and it can hurt the mobility of this
Gotcha.
ball joint. So I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't recommend it. The O-ring that's in there is perfect. It works great.
Nice.